Okay.
All right.
All right. CDL 2022, June 6th. Unless others have other agendas, we were discussing scoring and social truth. Partly the work we're doing on SenseCraft, partly the work that Bentley's doing on Gulli, and partly some of the more speculative work I'm doing on my side. Anybody has another agenda proposal? No, okay. So actually, I don't think, have I shown SenseCraft recently to you folks?
I think last time you talked about it, it was only like a couple minutes. So I don't think we've seen, it'd be great to see.
Yeah,
where you are at.
yeah. I think it's not a bad idea, actually. Give me 2 seconds. This, oh God, that's not the, where's the, okay, well, that will do. It's not great, but it'll do. So this is a lot of the SenseCraft logic is about, we have quests and we have guilds. Guilds are like teams. And if I'm looking at the team, the team is playing, the guild is playing a certain number of quests. And I can look at what's in the quest. Now seems I'm not playing this one. Yes, I'm playing in Guild My Guild. And here we have basically an IBIS structure with question
IBIS?
Issue-based information system. It's one of the first structured conversation dialogue mapping techniques. And it's pretty simple. You have question nodes, answers, pro arguments, con arguments, not illustrated, reference nodes. And this is an innovation that I'll explain shortly, but it's not standard IBIS. One of the first IBIS system was called GIBIS, developed by Conklin. There's a great book about dialogue mapping by Conklin, which is easy to find on Amazon, Jeff Conklin. And they were using it in Wicked Conversation in real time. So you'd have a IBIS note taker doing, here's the IBIS tree of the conversation as it happens. And it made conversations go better. Historically, that's been demonstrated. People would be able to talk at the map rather than at one another, and it would diffuse tension. It's been tried asynchronously, and that was mostly a disaster. Without curation, you don't get a good map, which shouldn't surprise no one here. But synchronous real time with the, trained secretary, great results. So what we've been doing for this IBIS scoring thing, and think of it as a game scoring, is that basically a node gets considered valid, like, okay, let me actually undo that. This is a comment node, so it's kind of not cancel. If I make this a comment node, that means it's not active in the scoring calculation. This thing is considered unsupported. So this question doesn't have an answer, or is not supported again, and the question doesn't have an answer because the only answer is unsupported. But if I make this active node, so to speak, no, I'm trying, there's a bug there, I think. If I make this an active node, then because there's a reference here, this is now considered supported with evidence. And because it's supported with evidence, it can add as support for this answer. And this answer is support, and the question is now considered answered. The question, I propagate the weight of all the answers on the question. And basically, if a question's been very active and got a lot of answers, it gets that much, it has that much more point weight. The points are given to the team who created the node. Here I have a question, and that's something important about IBIS. It's not just pro-con, it's also about opening up a new question at any point and saying, oh, what about this? Right? And here, let me actually edit this one and make it into a reference and update. So now this is supported. This is a threat, the notion that an answer to a question can threaten the answer it's questioning. Like, this is a quote unquote innocent question. What about this? Could we do this way or that way? And you're saying, you know, I think actually that this is really not working. So this is an indirect con argument, really. Instead of having a direct con, I can have an indirect con. That's something I introduced. But the beauty of that is if I add another alternative, which is an answer, and let me cancel, let me support it with a reference. Evidence. Then, even though there's a negative answer to the question, there's a positive one, there's an alternative. And that means that the question is considered answered and this is not threatened anymore.
What are the node types?
So the node types are question, answer, pro, con, reference, and this weird con answer thing, which is a indirect thing. So that's the, except the con answer, this is the IBIS system. Actually, in the compendium, which was one of the great IBIS applications out there, were very old. There was, after GIBIS, there were two, the links were typed. So you had the notion of a pro-con argument. So it was actually a graph, not a tree. So you could have an argument that was pro a certain node and con another node. So the pro-con was in the link type, not in the node type, or also in the link type. Let's put it that way. And and when you added a question to a node, to an answer, the question could either be in the link type again, the question could either threaten the answer or not. And this is, I wasn't happy about typing links, and this is why I created the con answer as an alternative to typing this link, saying, is this question threatening the answer or just an innocent question? So for example, question about the detail, or do we do it this way or that way for this sub question? So in terms of scoring, you, again, in a game context, you get points for adding answers, adding evidence to your answers. You actually lose a small amount for making unsupported statements. There is no verification of the statement, of the quality of the reference in the tool. That's something that would probably be a social mechanism otherwise, and we're thinking about that. Eventually, it would be nice to have something like that.
So someone can't put a con on a evidence.
Yeah, so someone could absolutely put a con on an evidence. Con is a pro or con is a valid, and that would be a relevance thing, and it's not distinguished well in this system. Whether it's a relevance con or a truth con. Okay. Which would be the relevance would be much more damning, I guess. It is, I suspect, like Gulli button, that anything that's asserted is believed, unless we have other mechanisms to say, hey, this was But yes, you can, if I put a con here, I could put a con on the con answer and say, this is not true because blah, 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 add a con and get invalidate the con that way. That also works.
And so that 0.5 answered, is that?
That's kind of cumulative in the sense that answer add and let me support it. Evidence. Oh, this gets okay. I thought this would add, but it's been a while since I've looked at the algorithm itself.
Instead of an answer.
A pro to what here?
Well, to the question, can you do that or not?
No, you can't add a pro to a question. That makes no sense.
But that doesn't make sense, right?
If you try,
I guess it's kind of weird having
there's an answer can have directly a con answer, which is weird actually. A question or a reference as a child.
So is there a way to make that 0.5 answer higher then?
I think normally it should get more points when there's more. I'm a bit surprised that it's only 0.5 at this point. I think if it has more answers, it should get more points because the original idea we took from the evidence engine, the McGonagall's evidence engine, is that a question that raises a lot of activity should have more points. If you have like basically the cumulative weight of everything under it should add to the value of the question. Now it's possible like, and then I said, oh, no, we need to look at evidence and we need to look at counter arguments, and something that was countered and not supported shouldn't have that much points. And then I made this algorithm, and it's possible I lost the cumulative aspect there, but I'm surprised because I thought there was something about, hey,
but
it's got.
Yeah, the intent is if you have a whole bunch of pros and one con, it would be closer to the pro side.
It would no, the intent is no. The pros don't counterbalance the cons. The cons have a dominate really the game. The pros are just a way to support, and in a way you'd need evidence at any rate. And if you have, the point of having many pros is if people start attacking your pros, then you have another pro in the game that can still work.
Okay. So do we want to contrast that with the Gulli?
Yes, I think we should. Absolutely.
So
sorry, just to finish, a lot of the SenseCraft thing is trying to make this a game. So it's got a status, it's draft, private draft. Actually, let me look. I just want to speak a bit about the system. I can't edit those because they're not mine, but normally you have a whole version control system on each node, and then they get published and other teams can see them and start responding to them. So that's a lot of the logic behind SenseCraft. Okay, go ahead, Alibot.
So actually it might be helpful to, if you want to keep your screen shared so I could contrast against that.
Sure. Let's do that.
So, and one of the, even just showing your SenseCraft screen, I think it'd be good.
Okay.
Yeah.
But we should have Gullibot.
Yeah, gullibot.com. And then if you want to hit, should you take the COVID-19 vaccine? And hit the more info button there in the bottom left of that speech bubble. I need to make that easier. So those are all kind of the pros and cons.
Okay.
I might get one with a show all so you can see it completely expanded. But I think it'd be good, since everyone has a context of your SenseGraph, your quest.
SenseCraft.
SenseCraft. You might go ahead and go back to SenseCraft, and let me just say what in there doesn't exist yet. So so SenseGraph is at that higher level to where you're proposing have a problem, right? And then you have potential solutions and you're kind of deciding which solution. Is that a fair way of describing that?
Yeah, and you're exploring. I mean, it's supposed
Yeah.
to be a sense-making tool. So you're trying to understand. It's not necessarily problem solution. It could be question and exploring different aspects of understanding around it.
Right. So it's kind of, I think of that as kind of a high level thinking, and Gollybot is just the lower level piece to where we have a proposal. Now we need to decide how confident are we in that proposal. And then
Yep.
the thought is later on, if you have multiple proposals, you could look at their scores against each other and weigh them against each other, and people could propose new proposals and stuff. But I didn't want to go up to that level of complexity. I thought it was useful to just have a way to map the epistemics of a fact check. So it's a smaller, or a group action. So it's a kind of a piece of what y'all are doing in SenseCraft. And then the other difference is, so just being that specific piece is that, yeah, if you just make a claim, there is no concept of evidence in Gollybot. You can put links in the statements, but the concept is that if no one asks you for evidence on it, then you don't have to provide it. Just if everyone agrees, then we don't have to go down to that level. And I just wanted to keep the model simple. I'm not saying that that's the best way to do it. The way y'all have that is interesting. But in this case, the scoring is, if you have, so there is a concept of relevance and of what I call confidence, and the terms are kind of vague. So like, truthfulness or accuracy, and then relevance, and then all that rolls up to a confidence score. But if you have more, in theory, if all your pros and cons are considered to be as relevant as each other or have the same weight, then if you have more pros than cons, then the score will be higher towards the pro side. It'll have a higher confidence rating. And then for each of those pros or cons, you can go in and give it pros and cons that will affect its weight in the argument. And it's based on its confidence and its relevance. So as you add more and more to it, so if you think something's either less important or not true, then you just put your reasons why, but each of those reasons are up for debate. And the scoring happens kind of the way you'd think intuitively it happens. If you have one pro and one con and they're both equally relevant, then you're halfway confident, and you're basically undecided because you have no reason. And that's Gollybot, the way a simple child robot would weigh not being able to read what the actual statements are. It just knows one pro, one con. So if you have two pros and one con, it would be 66% or whatever. If you're going from 0 to 1, and of course it can be -1 to +1, or it could be a scale of 0 to 1 in percentage. Still trying to figure out what's more intuitive to people.
So just checking. So you can say truthfulness and relevance independently. So, but the pros and cons, do they affect the truthfulness or relevance a priori?
You state which it does. By default in the UI, it defaults to confidence, to truthfulness.
Okay.
Most of the time you're arguing truthfulness, I think. But when you're adding a pro or a con, you can say it affects relevance instead.
Okay, good. That's fine. Makes perfect sense. It's what ID map is doing. So you don't have the concept of importance, or I guess you'd roll importance into relevance, right?
Yes. So the reason, and actually I prefer the term importance, because you can actually say that this pro or con is more important than all the other claims in this with the same shared parent. So it's more than just relevance, it is importance.
Right.
I was just using the CDL terminology, but
Yes, no. It's valid to do that. It's perfectly valid to do that. I'm thinking of importance in the Delphi sense, right? Delphi had, you could say, when you make it was more for predictions, but you say this factor is how likely is it to actually impact, and how much of an impact does it have on what you're trying to predict. So it can be very likely to have a small impact, very unlikely to have a big impact, but these are very different affects confidence or relevance.
Now, so an interesting thing about the scoring that may not be intuitive is that so you have kind of a parent claim and it has two children claims, and one's a pro and one's a con. If that pro, if its truthfulness is kind of like in the middle, we don't know if it's true or we don't know it's false, it is automatically weighted down the closer it is to undecided or to the center of truthfulness. So if something is kind of unknown to be true, then it has no weight in the argument.
Right.
Which kind of makes sense when you think about it, but it may not be obvious until you kind of look at a couple examples.
Right. Oh, okay. So if it's uncertain in terms of truthfulness, it also destroys its relevance, so to speak.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Interesting. And again, yes, I agree. It makes sense. But what if it's uncertain and important? That's really interesting, because then you can see, hey, we really need to decide this one because it's the key argument.
Yeah. So that kind of meta understanding of this is something we need a study on or something like that won't be apparent in the scoring system as it is now. It'd be interesting to write an algorithm to kind of look for those instances, but the thought is that people will be going through the tree and saying, oh, I think this should be true. Why is Gullibot think it's false? And they would dig in and say, oh, there's no studies on that, and we need a study, or that one study was done badly. So let's do another study and settle this.
Yeah. No, it would work. I agree. Yeah, it's true that it is. I think it is.
So I just want to clarify that. What's the pro parent, pro main? Is that like pro con? Like if you uncheck that, then it's a con, or
yeah.
And then main. What's the main part?
Main is the very top claim.
Okay.
So sometimes it's easier to think about it. I know I'm on team purple or team orange, so I can just say pro or con, it's the parent. Sometimes in context, you're thinking, I'm just thinking about the item right above it. So
but is that implied by how many back and forth there's been? Like, or do those can you toggle those independently, or are those kind of keyed off?
No, they're linked. So they'll be the same if it's the same, if it's on the same side as the main one, but if it's one
an enemy of my enemy is my friend, sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
Which is not always true, by the way.
So there's a concept of that so I agree, Marc-Antoine, that may not be true there are some claims that are not reversible.
Yeah,
I'd like to talk about that a little bit. Like, are there some known common examples, or what's the?
No. So that's why, I mean, I do have a flag in the system that says this claim is not reversible. So if you prove it false, we could probably, I used to have one. If we prove it false, it doesn't detract from its parent. It just can neutralize its parent. Is one.
If I say A is true because B, and then I prove B is false, it doesn't mean that I've proven A is false.
Yeah.
It just means that we don't have that particular reason to believe A. We may have another one.
Yeah, I think right now the way I have the math set is actually by default. Yeah, if you prove something false, it has no impact on the debate whatsoever.
Which is the correct way to go.
Right. Sometimes, and so the question is, there are a few things to where if you prove it false, it would be it would counteract the
If
parent
it's the
claim.
only reason to believe it, then
But
yeah.
you can either add another claim with the wording reversed, and that would be true, and that would counteract it. Or I have a flag on it just so I don't have to have so many claims to where it does reverse if it goes, but then you kind of need to reverse the wording. And so there's some nuances there, but yeah.
No, but I think that when you say pro-parent, con-parent, I don't think it's a big deal. It's true that usually if you're talking against a pro, you're talking against the main. But it doesn't disprove the main. It just talks against at least one reason to believe the main. That's fine. So yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about it. I think what you're doing is fine. It is interesting because for us, the pros have very little weight because we don't see them as balanced out. They're purely epistemic. They're not like reasons. Oh, we should do this because here are the why we would like it, how we won't like it. We're very much more in the area of belief, and here's all the reasons we believe this, but oh, there's a reason not to believe it. It's kind of determinant. It's one disproof is enough. I mean, evidence in an epistemic, you're looking at disproof, you're not looking at proof. Now, of course, the proof can be useful for, you have to find another model that's consistent with all the evidence.
Yeah, so there are some claims where if you have more and more different types of evidence coming together, you would believe in it more. But that doesn't apply to everything.
One thing I'm beginning to believe more and more now is that
because you got more evidence.
There's no such yes, there's no such thing as an argument purely for or against a single claim. If you think about it as scientific hypothesis, right? Each experiment allows you to say, well, these hypotheses are more or less consistent with the new evidence. And if they're truly inconsistent, yes, they've been disproven, that's fine, but no hypothesis is ever proven, right? It's only more plausible with respect to that evidence and than those existing, but it's with a given set of hypotheses. I may come up with a new hypothesis that gets ranked higher than on that particular evidence than all the previous hypotheses, and the evidence that was a pro for that hypothesis becomes a con because actually the evidence proves that new hypothesis even better. See, yes. I don't know if I'm clear enough.
So my thought is that there's going to be different claims that need slightly different logic. Where like if I'm trying to decide, let's say I don't have big studies, I just have a small group and, 5 people in my community has tried this and it worked out for them.
I have an data and yeah.
Then it's kind of, yeah. Or we're making decisions in an imperfect environment. So, or like if you're talking about, well, if we should do this gun law and say, okay, it will, or no, we're working on qualified immunity right now. So, hey, it'll increase the quality of police. And then it's like, well, we won't be able to hire any. Let's say costs will rise. So we're weighing multiple effects of that decision.
And that's really the important case. Yes, I agree with you. Looking at multidimensional. And this is where I'm also thinking most arguments should not be considered in isolation, but in a way they're criteria. And each proposal is weighed against multiple criteria. So again, it's more a matrix than either a tree or even a graph. It's on this criterion, for example, impact on insurance costs. This is the example you're giving. Well, these proposals work better than those proposals. Whereas on this other criteria, citizen safety, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah. So I would say where I am with Gulli is I'm kind of taking the general case and playing with it, building up some data examples, and then seeing where it falls down.
Yep,
And
yep,
there's definitely like better tools for specific cases. Like if you're trying to figure out what stereo to buy, ranking it on 4 different things and getting relative weights. I mean, you can do that in this structure, but it's not convenient or easy to see.
This is decision support system space, right?
Yeah.
And there you get into multiple ranking and weighing of the different, like, do you care more about this or do you care more about this? And it's a bit better on this and a bit worse on that, and relative importance of the factors. And yeah, it's a totally different logic.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So your next step is to try and have people play this game.
Yeah. We're thinking very hard about the game logic. Right now, basically, in a way, I'm giving points to adversarial moves. That is, hey, you've disproven something. Or to, hey, you've come up with a new question. That's not adversarial, that's constructive. But I really want to emphasize the constructive aspect. Like, for example, opening up a new question is, you're supposed to get points from the answers that accrue from it. So that means opening up new questions and opening up the conversation is always good. And I think that's important. We want to reward new questions. Something that I hope to do is get people to mark, this is a new answer that builds on previous answers. And so that would accrue points for the new answer, but also for the component. So I want to reward synthesis, but rewards anything that contributes to synthesis. And basically you'd lose points if you don't say that what you're building on. And this would be a human check mechanism. So again, this is about, what do I want to reward? I want to reward synthesis. I want to reward finding a common ground. So that would be a kind of refactoring. And I have to think about how to express refactorings in the system. I want to reward steel manning. What are the positive moves? What are the conversation advancing moves as opposed to the purely adversarial? I think that shutting down a bad idea is a good thing, and I certainly want to continue reward this, but I'm trying to balance the need for that with the consciousness that it's a more negative move than anything that moves towards synthesis.
How do you reward steel manning? Does anyone have thoughts on that?
The one thing, and this is very, if you give pros to somebody else's proposal, I think that's a form of steel manning. And that's perfectly fine. If you, even if you attack those pros, right? But at least you've explained why it was a good thing before. But one thing I'm looking at very much is much more collaborative definition. So, and this would be a rather deep change in the game structure. Like, for example, I'm thinking, should I get people to directly build a structured conversation, or should we go progressive formalization in the game? So that I'd come up with a proposal in text, get the other teams to make it structured, and then reward, for example, people who found structure elements that the others didn't find. So, but that were in the text. So rewarding careful reading and good reflection. And then basically that's another way I could reward steel manning. And the advantage of that is that we're really using the game to teach the process of structuration, because we'd be rewarding good structuration efforts. So that's something I'm thinking about for round 2, but we'll finish it. We'll finish in this stage first with let's play the create the structured conversation. Certainly I want to think more in terms of since, for example, the synthesis move is something I want to build in stage one, the notion this solution builds on these previous solutions and make that explicit and reward that explicitly.
I
For me,
got
that's
a few details about the game. So is it turn-based? Or
it is right now instant. I do want to make it turn-based. That's another, there's a bit of logic to make it turn-based already, and I have to finish that logic because I think it would be better.
And
but we're having that argument, me and Jack, the various pros and cons of turn-based versus.
Is it, and you mentioned teams because there's guilds. Is it one guild against another or multiple guilds at one time?
It's
or am I phrasing it wrong?
multiple guilds co-constructing the same tree. And each guild has its own internal logic creating these private nodes, and then at some point they decide, yeah, this is good enough, let's publish. One thing to make it turn-based, what I'd essentially do is say it's ready for publication, and they would all become public at a given moment. So all the moves of all the guilds would become public at a given moment. The reason why this is not like, that part is simple. What is not simple is then you're more likely to have duplicate nodes, and you have to worry about deduplicating and have a mechanism for, a social mechanism.
But would it be a finite number of kind of quote sub moves, or like would you be able to add an unlimited number of claims in a move?
We would not have our initial thought is no finite number. You just add as much as you want.
So it's more like a simultaneous publishing cadence.
Yeah.
Maybe like daily or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking about having two teams debate, and either one way, where they, like some of the games that we have today where you have 24 hours to make your move, and then the other team can make a move. They can go as fast as they want, but they have up to 24 hours to make their move. So that's considering that. And then also I kind of have a game show version where I think of two teams of three, two researchers and a barker, so that you if you're watching it on video later on, it would be a constant one team making a move, then another team making a move, because you have other people looking at the moves made by the other team and figuring out counterclaims and stuff.
There's certainly a possibility to have team-based so that each team gets to make one move at a time. I didn't think of that so much. But we don't want to stop people from adding to the tree, basically. Like, the richer the tree is, the more the end result, the more useful the end result is.
Yeah, it can slow down an already slow.
Yeah, and that's part of the dynamic issue, right? On the one hand, we want people to think before they move. And that's why the turn-based, it feels to me, it helps people mull things over. On the other hand, we've had people saying, I'm interested in this as a individual game, but not so much as a team game, because all this negotiation with the team, it seems like too much trouble, and it slows down the dynamic. And it's like, okay, it's an opinion, it's an individual opinion, it's worth what it's worth. But it's true that people are not used to thinking about, people are used to just speaking, right? Now, we could penalize that all we want. I don't think it'll stop people from doing it. The whole point of the guild, of introducing the guild, is forcing people to, hey, you know what, if we say that, maybe we'll get in trouble. And getting people to think before they talk. And that's something we do want to encourage, because this is about training people to be better at conversation. So how do we encourage deep listening? That's still an open question. That's why the reflection, the answer on progressive formalization, so reflection through progressive formalization, is something I'm really interested in long term. But short term, even making sure that, for example, no argument comes without evidence. For me, that's part of the think before you speak dynamic we're trying to create. But does that make it less interesting to people. I don't know.
Yeah.
There's not enough deep strategy yet. Like my real question here is, how can I make it really something that gets people to think strategically? For example, I could see questions, like question cards that you could play a few times, which is, okay, how would you change your proposal if this were different, you know, and trying to get the other team to reply in a certain way. I certainly want tokens such as, what's the most inspiring thing that another team played? And getting people to spend those tokens as another reward mechanism. Things like that. I'm trying to think about, and even, you know, if ideally, if this happens to be something that leads to action, then again, you could reward a posteriori a very good answer. Hey, this is what we choose to do, and it worked. That should be worth bonus points after the game, and the guild should be long lasting that way. The other thing we're thinking about is long-term transclusion. Like if there was a whole conversation tree in another game that explored something in depth, and it's relevant in this game, well, you should be able to quote and transclude that branch. And then that means that branch was high value and should get a posteriori extra points. So these are things we want to build as social dynamics, but there's still a lot we don't know about and we're uncertain about in terms of what makes the game fun.
What was the spending you were mentioning? Like what would people spend tokens on?
What's the most inspiring move of another team?
And so how does that work? Like someone has gained tokens somehow, and then they spend it on I guess kind of like a vote for the most inspiring moves, and then the recipient gets those
points.
Tokens. And okay, well, yeah. Is it point? That's what I'm kind of curious. Points versus tokens. I'm just kind of curious this idea of
tokens in the sense that they're in limited number.
Okay, points are limited or are unlimited?
The points are so far unlimited, but the tokens, like points obtained in this fashion, would be from limited tokens.
And you can get points for awarding it, not just getting it, right? Sort of as an
yeah. Well, for example, we should say that spending them is necessary, or you'd actually lose points from not spending them, or something like that, right?
Depending on what is it? The losing points incentive is stronger than the gaining.
Yeah, we want, you know, the big difficulty is anything that you create a rule for, that you codify, will be gamed, in the sense that people will get strategic about it. Like there's a lot of stuff Jack was telling me about that's often something that happens in the Oxford debates. Oxford debates, you get points for changing people's minds. So what people do is they pretend to believe something other than they do, and then they reveal their true colors in the second vote, so that it looks like they've changed their mind and their option wins. How to avoid that? How to get people to be honest? Because I do think that finding, you know, the change, I'm still very fascinated by the change my mind dynamic, right? The people giving points for the deltas, the most persuasive thing. But that requires people being honest about what they believe or what they think is good. And then this is something where I think it's really important. Like, for example, you lose point for if you brought something that ended up contradicted and nobody else, and, you know, the contradiction stood, unless it's something you've proposed yourself, right? If you gave the argument and the counter argument, that's a straw manning up to a point, not a steel manning, but it's a valid move. You described the possibility and said, well, this doesn't work because then you don't lose points for doing that. Because you've contradicted your own option. And now, if it was a real straw man and somebody can reformulate it better, and then it's shown that it's a straw man because it was needlessly vulnerable to the attack, now that's more interesting. And this is, I think, a less useful, a less positive, a less constructive move. And how do we detect that? I don't have answers to those questions. What I would like is, we have good catalogs of everything you can do wrong in a conversation, all the sophistry, all the sophistic arguments. We have a list of sophistic arguments that were built and constructed. Then what we don't have a good list. We have a list of valid arguments, but we don't have a good list of constructive arguments, like steel manning, synthesis, deep listening. But deep listening, it's the listening part. So again, it's a bit too inner. What are the outer manifestations of deep listening that can be captured? That is something we're thinking about a lot these days. In
But do
the
you all
sense craft.
have an option to where if someone makes a proposal, if I can reword it and they accept that?
That's something I want to do. Yeah, I don't have it yet. No.
Okay, but that's in the plans. So kind of a quick question is, how close are y'all to some sort of like alpha where you'd want some play testing? And do you have a finite, so you keep talking about kind of like version 1, but it sounds like your feature set is not.
The feature set is not finished. The question is, is it an MVP at this point? I think we're pretty close to an MVP, in the sense that we have the team building. We have something I didn't speak about because that's very much game dynamics, is roles. Like when you play in a game, you have roles, and the roles allow you to make certain types of moves and publish them up to a certain level. So you start, private draft, guild, role draft, visible by this role, or guild draft, visible by the guild, and then proposed, okay, we think it's good enough. And then the guild leader says, yes, that's good, let's publish this. So there's this whole process. And which roles you have tells you, okay, you can bring it up to that level of visibility for this node type. So that there's a lot of logic there. It's one of the few things that's missing is right now the scoring is done purely on the front end. There's no storage, but otherwise we can play. I mean,
yeah, if you have a group of people that know they're play testers, so they're there to maybe find hidden strategies, but not to break the tech.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And hidden strategies that we know aren't already in the plans to be prevented, right? So we shouldn't
Right.
be.
Yeah, that we could have that now.
Okay.
There's enough. This tech is robust enough for that at this point.
And then do you think it would be valuable even if you just had one person in each of the guilds for the play testing, or do you think you need?
Sure. I think we're really interested in the internal guild dynamics, but otherwise, yeah.
Because I think this might be one of the purposes of CDL is kind of to help each other, test out our experiments. So if you're getting to that point, maybe it's a time that we put a call out and
Yeah, would
see
make
which
sense.
CDL people would be willing to,
We didn't get into the whole social truth thing I wanted to get into, but
Do you want to spend a few minutes real quick before we?
I'll spend a few minutes real quick. I've spoken about it a few times recently. I mean, it's really, how do we show in a synthetic fashion the epistemic status of a claim? I've spoken often about a claim being mostly consensual, totally fringe, or polarizing, or just unknown, I guess. So, how many people strongly believe it's true, how many people strongly believe it's false, and you get 4 quadrants. And if nobody believes either way, it's undecided. If there's a lot of people believing both true and false, it's polarizing. And if most people believe it's true, it's consensual. If most people believe it's false, it's fringe. So that's simple, but not quite enough, because that's just the claim in itself. What's more interesting is the epistemic reasons. Why do people believe it's true? Why do people believe it's false? And the way I'm thinking about it now is, when you have a claim, what you'd want to know is, this has been held to be plausible according to these epistemic criterion. It's been published in a peer-reviewed journal. It's gone through the SIFT methodology, which is, very much a low-quality heuristic, but it's still better than nothing. It's been quoted in the Bible. It's not something I'd agree with, but it's a epistemic community that has its own criterion for truth. And I think being able to know that a claim is believed true, believed false, or believed unknown in a given epistemic community. And then you could subscribe to epistemic community. But again, we don't want to create bubbles. We want to make people aware that, hey, your epistemic neighborhood believes this is clearly true. Well, there's all this these other communities that believe it's clearly false, and maybe you want to know why they believe that, because they're not just claiming it's false, they're claiming to have reasons to believe it's false, which is really the interesting thing. Then you need to dig into those, and then maybe you'll find out, these reasons are reasons you have yourself reasons to believe they're false, and that's about building your own epistemic net. But knowing that some epistemic communities have reasons according to their own truth criteria and their own truth finding process to believe or disbelieve a claim, I think is really what we'd like to be showing about a claim when we show a claim in a CDL page, ultimately, right? I know that Tim is very much against the whom, but I think it's extremely important to have I think there is a good, with all the disinformation out there, it is important to have a way to distinguish this claim is there because it came from some, National Enquirer versus this comes from peer-reviewed journal. And having the kind of markers of community stamps is something I'm thinking about these days a lot. So I'm not saying this is my last word on this, but the problem I'm trying to get us to think about is, what do we want to show alongside a claim to say how to give a user a good idea of its status, a synthetic thing, and then they can dig into, okay, why is that belief? What are the arguments? Yada, yada. But just, this is the status of this claim. It's being strongly attacked. It's been strongly attacked by this community. It's been strongly upheld. People are unsure, or it's been polarizing. That's what I think people need to be able to see at a glance.
Are there any the academic papers, is there any, what's what I'm looking for? You know what I mean? Is there any sort of accepted academic viewpoint on a score that combines truth and controversy, or polarization? And
I haven't seen them, but I will admit I haven't searched that much for them. And for me, having a single score is probably an anti-goal.
I didn't necessarily mean a single score. I was thinking, I mean, at the very least, a tuple, a two score, like a two vector. I don't know what you're gonna say. Like
Yeah, I see what you're saying. Fair enough.
it can be more complicated. Like the more complicated it gets, the harder it is to,
To
draw a
read.
summary for it. But the simpler it gets, the less accurate or meaningful it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what I'm trying to see is, what is it we really want to know? Like, let's take it from another perspective. If you and I are talking and I say something which is you don't know, obviously, you don't agree with, obviously, what will you ask me to have an idea about? Okay, why do you believe that? Or is there evidence? Or is there contradiction? Or is there, what is the most urgent thing you want to know about this claim of mine you're trying to test?
Why you believe it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly. You just said the evidence. Yeah. The thought process that led you to it.
Yeah.
Is this different than another score? Is this related to score in some way, or is this just another scoring method?
It's scoring is a kind of way to synthesize a lot of factors. And maybe it can be reduced to a single score, I'm not sure. Certainly we need a way to synthesize and make it in a way unidimensional, though I just spoke against that, because at some point the reality is we'll have tons of arguments and and claims about something, and we'll want to be able to prioritize them, and we'll say, okay, let me show these first to you because they're the ones that are probably the most interesting to you, not necessarily the most true, the most interesting, because, and that requires almost for me to have a mental model of what I assume you already believe and what you don't believe. And so what brings the most information, what's the most, has the highest entropy value, so to speak, so that it's interesting to you. If I say sky is blue, it's like, why do you care? We all know that. And if I say sky is red, it's like, that's bullshit. So what are the interesting statements? And that at some point, there is a linear function ultimately. On the other hand, when I present one of those interesting claims, is what you'll want to know is that interesting, for example, because it's established and surprising, that's one case, versus highly controversial, and we need to understand this for whatever reason, because it's a key argument and something else we care about. Those are two totally different reasons why it's interesting. So interesting is not enough. And you'll want to know which one I mean, right?
Yeah, even for the Gulli bot, I've noticed that I need kind of an explanation of the reason. It's helpful when you're looking at the top level claim to understand why that scores that way, because it could be the claim is ambiguous and thus it's unknown, or there's both pros and cons, or maybe no one's commented on it and the only reason we marked it as true is because there's no one's contended it. So all those things, that's the immediate second thought where almost the score is useless without that.
Yep.
And I haven't seen enough of a pattern yet. So the way I'm solving that is we're just gonna have a human kind of do their own short sentence about what's causing the score to be that way.
I think if you had just number of people who believe it, number of people who disbelieve it, it would already give you a lot. Because again, if they're high and balanced, controversial. If they're unbalanced, then against consensus or fringe. If low numbers, and probably maybe out of the number of people who saw it and didn't give an opinion, because that's also interesting. Or maybe allow people to say, I'm not sure, and then have that part of the number. If the thing is early and young and nobody had a chance to give a score, it's not the same as, people saw it and they were not sure and they didn't leave a number. But anyway, I think the sheer number is interesting. Michael?
Well, this might speak to my lack of knowledge of how far you've talked about this already, but in terms of how a claim is different from a source of that claim and how a source would attach to said claim. Like you gave examples of like a peer-reviewed journal versus a quote in the Bible. So if I have a claim and that claim has a source, peer-reviewed journal, or that claim has a source, quote in the Bible, and how you're talking about, well, how many people believe this claim versus how many people believe this or vote up, let's say, this peer-reviewed journal or vote up this quote in the Bible. I mean, those are different ways you could then produce a score. So I'm not sure, again, how much you've talked about is the source just another claim, or like how that's represented in the data model. So that's interesting to me, and how that would look and how that would be represented. Again, is a source just another claim? And yeah,
that's exactly the kind of conversation I'm trying for us to get into. On the one hand, yes, the source is a claim, but usually the source itself, like this comes from that, is pretty easy to determine. It's true, it's not true. But still, you can have people trying to sabotage that for whatever reason. But let's assume that the claim of source is fine. I think that it's less interesting to know it comes from here, it comes from there, except as it's anchored in an epistemic practice. And how many people believe something is not terribly important, except on sociological basis. But how many people buy into the epistemic criteria for determining it's true? And that's really interesting. Like, do people buy into the scientific method? Right? And then if it's peer-reviewed, and peer-reviewed means it's been through the scientific method, again, unless the article was retracted or contested, that means there are counter arguments which are also valid according to the same criteria of using, the peer review socio-technical testing mechanism, social mechanism, really, not technical in this case. So if we can have a way to say this claim has the signs of having used that method, and people believe in that method. See, it gives me an indirect indication of the value of the claim. It's not that it's in a peer-reviewed journal versus the Bible. It's that it's in a peer-reviewed journal indicates that it's been using the scientific method. Again, unless proven otherwise.
Marc-Antoine, what was the thing that you said was often not controversial? Something about whether the claim appears in the source or something?
Yeah. Yeah. And there are cases where it will be controversial, but in general, yeah. Like,
wait, well, let me say what I'm saying. You tell me if I'm responding to the right thing, because I'm still not sure I understood you. But I think that's often not true. It's often the case that people don't even think, first of all, clearly about what if I were to me now playing a role, reading something, I'm feeling a lot of things. I like that. I'm not sure about that. I like that. But very infrequently do people actually stop and say, wait, what I just read, that sentence or this, these two sentences, what is that author really saying? If I had to explain that to someone else in one sentence, one proposition, one claim, whatever, how would I phrase that? And I think people very infrequently do that. And I think that's, to me, I'm very interested in that process of questioning people, like, well, what did you really just read? How would you describe that? Because people often, I think, make jumps of inference, like, oh, well, that was proven, in that paragraph. It's like, well, no, what they said was this, and that doesn't prove what you're now saying it does. Does that, am I on the mark with what you're saying? I'm not sure.
You're absolutely right. What I said is often not controversial, is this quote is in that paper.
Oh yeah, that shouldn't be that controversial if it's a quote, right? But that, but the interpretation.
But you're absolutely right that from the quote to a claim, there's a very, very long, fraught path. I fully agree with you.
I'd be interested in talking about that. Should probably jump and see what's going on in my work chat, but I'd be interested in chatting with that next time, because I mean, it's something that CDL, our conversations, I think, started turning towards a few months ago. Like the media fragments, I think, was sort of the terminology started using in the Trello. And I've been thinking about this for a bit now, and I call them proposition appearances, like this idea that there's a phrasing and I tend to call claims propositions because I think claim sounds like there's a claimer, and I'm trying to, I think of those as two separate things. Like there's the proposition, and then there's who we see, claiming that proposition or stating it.
I agree. I agree totally. I
And
like
then
that.
it appears, and it's like it's a debatable relation. Like, does this proposition appear in this quote, at this media, at this source?
Yep.
So yeah, I'd be interested in chatting about that next time.
Absolutely, would love to.
Okay. I haven't like ever really, I'm not sure. I'm so all over the place right now. It's like I have this old proof of concept, that tool howju.com, and then it doesn't have anything about appearances in it. And now appearances are so interesting to me. I have started writing up, this long, well, it's not that long, it's like 10 pages, like summary doc, but I don't know, maybe we could just look at the sections or just have a discussion about the
I'm all for it.
appearances, the sources and stuff.
I'd love to revisit appearances. I think they're extremely important.
Okay. I maybe I could do my best to lead a conversation at next time, quote unquote, or facilitate a conversation.
Sounds good.
Okay.
But I do want us to all think about what is it we want the system to convey about a claim in the CDL view. Like, what's the most synthetic, but at the same time informative? What do we want to see in that?
What we'd want a system to convey about a claim.
Yeah, the question I asked, right? I think it's a great question. What all do we want to know?
I just think that that's an area of experimentation,
Oh yeah,
and I don't know if the core interchange stuff, it needs to be able to handle it, but not be an answer to that question.
I agree that
answer.
I agree that there's probably many valid answers, and fixing it would be a mistake. On the other hand, I want to think more about what goes there, so that, again, it's not something that we preclude with the basic. Like right now, I'm thinking about my data format, and my basic question is, what do truth values look like in my data format, right? As you said, there's a proposition, that's fine, and there's canonicalizing that, which is its own problem. But there's, in a given context, this proposition is encountered. Is it being claimed? Is it being asked as a question? Is it being refuted? Is it being... Now that's in one context. In if it's a living context, like a conversation, I can change the truth value of a statement that I just made seconds ago. So in my mind, the truth value of statements changes all the bloody time. Thank God. And that means, again, what's represented? And especially if it's a complex thing I'm unsure about, well, there's all these pros, all these cons. What is the truth statement? How do I, like, if you ask me, do you believe that? And it's complicated. Here's reasons why I think it might be true. Here's reasons why I'm not sure. And here's why. What is, think of it this way, what is stored in my brain about the truth statement of something? And that's what I'm working on right now.
This is something that I think Jamie started having a word around, like micro voting. And it's something that had been on my mind, but I never put a word to it. Have you seen her talk about this? I think it was in some Medium post the Society Library had, where she was trying to say, like, let's break the process of, I forget, I'm gonna misparaphrase it, but let's break the process of reading sources and making arguments into a series of micro votes. And I think that's a valuable kind of, it's kind of reductionist, I guess, but I think it's valuable to say, okay, do I believe this appears there, in this source? Okay, yeah, I do. Do I think that this would prove that, yes or no? Okay, well, if no, then maybe it proves this other thing that's similar. Okay, so now this is a, alternative. Okay, so I think this appears there. I think this proves that. So I guess I believe that, right? And yeah, there's always there's a holistic gut check of whether what you just, reductionistically walked through, whether they match up, and if not, why. But I do think that sort of, walking through these micro votes is a valuable and interesting thing a tool might do.
That sounds very interesting. If you can find that, I would like to
What our post?
read. Yeah.
Let me do-
Yeah, I
if
looked at and I couldn't find it, or at least not under that name.
Okay, I'll send it to the thing. I bet she'll, if we just asked her, I bet she'll know which one.
Yeah,
she's
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about.
yeah,
I
yeah,
think it
yeah.
might have been the one she in some posts, I think in the fall, introduced this idea of a knowledge panel where I forget the details, but it's like has it has the 4 different maybe phrasings of, or you can cycle through with like, this is the expert phrasing of this thing, this is the layman's terminology of what this thing stands for, and then here's like the media that proves it's true. I think it was in that same Medium post I saw somewhere. Yeah, I'll take a look. Let's just start with the Medium.
We
Anyway.
could probably lead that to as an exercise.
Oh, Media
after-
Gallery. I think that was what she called it. Is that right?
After the meeting.
Oh no, that's just a literal-
But I don't think what you describe matches what I think I'm talking about, to be honest.
Mhm,
That's it. I'm sure it's interesting and I will look into it.
mhm.
But you're speaking about, is it there? Is it not there? I'm talking about what's my inner representation, or what would federated systems share about a claim, right? I think they would want to share all the reasons it may be believed, all the reasons it may not be believed. And up to a point, how many people are behind each reason, but it's less important than, it's not so much the reason, it's itself. It's this reason, in Toulmin terms, this reason has this warrant. And what is the common warrant of the reasons to believe or disbelieve a claim? And the warrants are extremely important.
Do you mean so? I looked up warrants at some point. They're like the things that you add to a argument to like push it over the line of being true, or what are warrants again? Is this
Let me show
Tollin? Is
you
that his name? Or
clearly quickly the Toulmin model, because it's really
Toulmin?
it's really important to know it. I really love it. It's in many ways, it's not complete, but okay, this is a quick. So you're saying grounds, here's the kind of the reasons why you believe the claim. This is the conclusion. There can be a qualifier, certainly, possibly, blah, blah, blah. There's can be a rebuttal, like unless other conditions. And we often forget the rebuttal. That's interesting. The warrant is the kind of logical background. Why is this ground relevant to that claim? It's because of this general fact.
the assumptions or premises.
Yeah, well, it's the field of common knowledge that serves as, it's not a specific premise, it's the general premise.
Right. Well, and it's something that most people don't, but I would say it is a premise, like you need it to be there to make a logical argument, but most people don't bother stating it because they assume it's shared, and it goes without saying.
Yeah, the assumed premises, the unspoken premises. And
backing is interesting. So backing is like an unspoken assumption that may not be shared, because I may not know that this person has a neighbor with dogs, but I do know that dogs are animals that bark and howl. Like that's sort of shared knowledge. Do you know what's the difference between backing and warrant?
Yeah, I'm trying to remember, because
like
frankly,
why the warrant would apply in this case.
Yeah. I think
I have to run.
Yeah, and probably the backing is usually even more fundamental than warrant, and maybe I meant backing in this case. It's possible I've been misusing this because it's been a while, but what I'm going at is really what is the epistemic background of this. Anyway, let's have I think it's a good time to close.
Okay. Yeah, I have some thoughts about that too, like the sussing out warrants.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks everyone.
All right, speak to you next time.
Yeah.
See you.